So happy to see you, dear Fred Gallo. Thank you for your contribution to the Hypnotherapy Congress of the Confédération Française de l'Hypnose et de Thérapie Brève in Luxembourg. We are very happy to have you here. Thank you.
Nice to be here, Christiane.
Yeah, very good. Please let me introduce you to our public. So you are Fred Gallo, PhD. You are a clinical psychologist in the US with a group clinical practice specializing in treating trauma, depression, anxiety, and chronic pain. Mm-hmm. You are a member of the American Psychological Association and the Pennsylvania Psychological Association. Fred Gallo was the first to publish a professional book on energy psychology. Since this first book, many others have followed. I think it's about 9 books so far, as well as numerous articles for the professional public, as well as for the general public. Research on energy psychology is an important topic for you. You have participated in a meta-analysis that showed that tapping is an active ingredient in treatment. You have been the president of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, ACEP, in 2015 and 16, and you continue to be an active member of ACEP. For more than 20 years, you have been traveling the world, offering presentations and training in energy psychology on the international level. And thank you again for coming to Luxembourg.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Your latest book has been published this year and is called The Tapping Toolbox. I think our French colleagues will be happy to hear that we hope to have a French translation ready for next year. Dear Fred, thank you for giving us the chance to learn more about your approach in accessing health. Your presentation is called Accessing Health and the Michel-Ange Principle. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let me begin. Okay, I was going to do this presentation at the forum, but we ran out of time. So here we're doing it so that people can benefit from it. And I'm looking forward to, it's not going to be quite the same the way it would be if I was up on stage and we were singing and all that sort of thing. But it's good to see all you happy people there, and I hope this makes you even happier today. So let me see what the next slide. We're going to show you some slides. The first slide, first of all, I want to talk about something about techniques. We all love our techniques. Okay, there's all kinds of techniques. There's hypnotic techniques, visualization, metaphors, anchoring. Anchoring where you maybe touch a person at a certain point while they're having a certain state, and then you touch another point when they have a state that they don't want to have, and you collapse them or you sequence them. There's a swish pattern, like a swish pattern could be you have the person think about something that bothers them, and they have an image, and then on that image you change the image. You change it from maybe being very large to very small. You change it from a movie to a snapshot. You change it from color to black and white. And then you swish between one and the other. And by doing that many, many times, it starts to change the person's experience. Or there's gestures. People use gestures. Like you may find interesting technique that I've used, where if somebody's talking about something and they go, "Oh, I feel so bad, about this," and you say, "Well, have you ever had a situation like that where you didn't feel bad and instead you felt somewhat better?" And they say, "Oh yeah, I had this situation and I felt more relaxed," they go. And so then you have them do something like this. You say, "Now think of that situation that bothers you," and they'll go like this and go like this. And you figure that it starts to change the way you're storing it in your brain and your energy system. And there's other techniques like I was talking to somebody at the forum, and he felt really bad about something. And he said, Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. I feel so bad that I did that. You know, I should have done this. And I told him to change the tone of voice, and we did something like this. I feel so bad. I wish I hadn't done that. And so he started doing that. Of course, you can't help but laugh at it. And that changes your experience. So there's lots of things. And then we have tapping and breathing exercises, like a technique that I often teach different clients is to do 4-8 breathing, where you breathe in through your nose for 4 and then breathe out through your mouth for 8 or 10 or whatever. And it shifts your neurology. It shifts it from the sympathetic mode, which is activation, to the parasympathetic mode, which is more relaxation. And there's mindfulness techniques and tapping, so I specialize in tapping, having people tap at different locations. Okay. Now the thing about techniques is, when you research them, you tend to research them from a manualized point of view. You have a manual and you're kind of rigid in what you're doing so that it's consistent across the board. In clinical practice, you don't want to do that. In clinical practice, you want to have flexibility. You want to suit the technique to the individual, and you want to do it in a way that's true for you as the therapist. You don't want to try to do it somebody else's way. Otherwise, it's hollow. Otherwise, it's not for real. It's not present. And so that's something about techniques. However, well, here, let me just say this. As far as techniques, you can find out a lot of techniques in these kinds of books, okay? So in the upper left, there's my latest book, The Tapping Toolbox, and it goes into a lot of the things that we're covering here today, and more. And then it shows different tapping techniques. There's other books like David Feinstein wrote The Promise of Energy Psychology, and he shows some things on energy medicine and energy psychology. Roger Callahan, who is really the founder of the tapping techniques, he had the book, The Tapping the Healer Within, and it goes into many different tapping routines for treating different kinds of conditions. And my book, Energy Psychology and Psychotherapy, I invited many people to write chapters who did their own variations. So you can find out a lot there if you want to know more about energy psychology and those methods. And like the neurophysics of human behavior with Mark Furman and myself, that goes into even hypnotic techniques and so on. So, but that's the technique department. However, let me say this. Have you ever encountered this? Okay, so here you are, the therapist, okay? And the client you're working with is discombobulated, okay? And here you going, and you feel stressed. You don't know what to do, okay? You've tried a technique, and the technique isn't working, maybe, or you're just so stressed because it's like nothing's working, and you feel so bad for this person, or maybe you don't even like them. You feel that way, and I'm sure none of you out there have ever felt that way toward a client. I'm sure you've always felt tremendous love in your heart and soul, right? No, I think we've all had our struggles with that at times, okay? And so if you're going to try to do a technique while you're in this kind of a state, I venture to say it's not going to be very effective, It's not going to fly. And there's a reason for that, I feel. And I'll go to this. There was a physicist many years ago. I'm not sure when that was. It might have been in the 1800s, somewhere there. Christian Huygens from Netherlands. And he loved pendulum clocks. And he made pendulum clocks. And this isn't a good representation of the kind of pendulum clocks he made, but it'll illustrate the point. One day he noticed that all of his clocks were swinging synchronously. And it occurred to him, how can that be? You know, I made that clock over there a year ago, and this one I just finished 2 weeks ago, and this one I just put it together the other day. And they're all swinging the same. How can it be, you know? I mean, they should be all haphazard. And so what he did is he stopped them and he started them all off in a random ways. And within a short period of time, I don't know how much time passed, but they were all swinging the same. He knew that that phenomenon happened, but he didn't know why it was. And later, from what I understand, physicists discovered that what would happen is that the clock with the strongest spring ruled, so that the other clocks synchronized to it. Now, the reason for that, I mean, it was just very common sense thing, you know, they're on a beam, and the strongest clock sends out this vibration, and so the other clocks would synchronize to it. Now, that has a lot of implications for therapy, I think, because if the client is so distressed and their vibration of distress is the highest level, and you synchronize from that, you get to go home feeling pretty worn out. And you're not in the position of being able to influence that situation very well. That there's a cybernetic principle from this that says that element within the system with the greatest flexibility rules. So if you have requisite variety, as we would call it, okay, so I have the ability to make moves, counter moves, then I'm going to be able to help that client do better, okay? And not that you want to, it isn't about you controlling them, running their life or anything like that, but being in a state of health so that they will synchronize to your health. Okay, so Michel-Angelo had this idea, and I guess this is a direct quote from him. He was sculpturing an angel, and he said, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set her free." So he saw it as the figure was already there in the stone, that he wasn't making it, he was just freeing it. He would see it there. He believed it was there. And then he freed it. And the same kind of principle applies to working with your client. So think of it as the soul and health are within the client. So now, if I'm working with a client and they're really, as I said earlier, discombobulated, okay, they're stressed, they're distressed, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're panicked. And I focus on that. If that's what I'm really paying attention to, then I'm going to synchronize to that. You're going to synchronize to that. And all that's going to do is reinforce more of the same. If I or you, if we keep our eye on the soul, the health within the person, if we really believe that in our heart and soul, that that's really there. So you notice this kind of, excuse the phrase, the kind of craziness around it, okay? The client is caught up in this, the patient is caught up in this, but I'm keeping my eye on this health within. My energy is going to stay stronger. You know, I've done this in workshops where I'll have a therapist and a client will be there. So somebody comes up and role plays their very difficult client, and so I'll do some muscle testing, and I'll as the client, the quote client is going on, the therapist generally tests weak, and because they get caught up in the moment of of that distress. Then what I do is I take the therapist aside, and I say, I'm going to tell the therapist the secret of life. And the secret of life is the soul and health within. So I tell them about that. And I said, now you don't have to really do anything other than just be there with that awareness and just keep your eye on that soul. And I said, sometimes, what I do is I just sometimes look toward the person's heart at times, and just to kind of anchor that for myself, that I see that health within the person. So anyway, the therapist is there, and now they can do anything. They could be reading the telephone numbers. They could just be nodding, or they could be smiling, or they can just listen. They could ask questions, or they could use a technique, whatever. But they've got a certain kind of, the term might be a milieu. They're in a certain state that's the best state for delivering. And so what happens is the therapist tests strong, and the client tests weak, and the therapist tests strong, and the client tests a little less weak, and and it keeps going on. Next thing you know, the therapist still tests strong, and the client starts testing strong, which is very, very interesting. I'd say about 99 times out of 100, that's the way it goes. Maybe it's only 97 times out of 100, but the client starts to catch up with what's going on with the therapist. And then when they're in that kind of a state, the delivery really works. Okay, so then your technique can work, or whatever. So that's what I'm calling the Michel-Angelo principle. Now there's some other principles that apply too. Okay, and it's like, what are the principles that apply for our psychological functioning? Okay. And, just like there's certain principles that apply for flight. Okay, in order for a plane to fly, there's three principles that account for that. One is gravity, another is lift, and another is drag. And you take those three principles, that explains flight. Snow, what accounts for snow? Maybe they had noticed a long time ago that there was a lot more snow on the north side of a mountain, or I don't know, let's say the north side of a mountain. And they said, north has a lot to do with snow. Well, that's an incorrect assumption. That's an incorrect principle. Eventually, people come to realize that there are certain principles that account for snow. And two of them, I don't know if there's a third, but the two of them are, there's not perspiration, but precipitation, which is water in the air, and the other is temperature. So you get a certain kind of temperature, a lower temperature, within a certain range, there's a certain window there, and then you have this precipitation in the air, and you get, lo and behold, you get snow. Okay. So what accounts for psychological functioning? Now you can talk about the brain, you can talk about hormones, you can talk about chemistry, you can, go on and on. But these three principles, and you could say in a way there are four principles, and I'll explain. That the one principle, by saying the fourth principle, they're all aspects of energy. They're different types of energy. But they're principles. Okay, so they're principles. Mind is one of the principles, and it's like it is the intelligence principle. It pervades the universe, and so there's this kind of universal mind. Physicists would call it energy. Okay, psychologists would call it mind. We use the term mind. Theologians would say God, but we're all talking about the same thing in a way. It's this intelligence principle. You see it in animals, you see it in plants, you see it in humans, okay? And then, so there's this universal, but then there's this individual personal mind, okay? And each of us has our personal mind. And so it's So we, in a sense, we live in separate realities because, you know, so you got your personal mind, you got universal mind. Then what mind is kind of a formless energy. And what happens is we, within mind, thought occurs. And thought is that energy in a specific form. And there's two kinds. First of all, one thing about thought, it's energy. It's not, in a sense, yeah, it's real thought, but it's not concrete real. It's more of an illusion. It's more of a blueprint, okay? And it can be a double-edged sword, you know, in a good way. You know, we couldn't do much without thought. Thought is a divine gift that we all have, you know. And you get this thought, and you figure out what to do, and next thing you know, you create a reality from it. Or we create destruction from it, okay, without knowing, okay. The higher our level of awareness about thought, the higher our thought recognition, the better. Then we're more free. Now, the thing is, interesting thing with thought is then we have consciousness. Oh, let me go back to thought for a second. There's a couple kinds of thought. One is a thinking process. It's a processing thinking. It's working. It's in a good way, it's analysis. And then we can apply that same thing in a way that's not very helpful. And we use the term ruminating, worry. If you direct it toward the past, it could be resentment, regretting, and it kind of like looks like analysis, but it really isn't. And it's just, it goes around and it creates a lot of distress for people. And then there's another kind of thinking you could call inspirational thinking or receiver mode. You know, you clear your mind. You're not doing processing thinking. You have a question, you're trying to figure something out, and you're kind of stumped. And you clear your mind and you just wait. And you know, if I just clear my mind and I wait, the answer will arrive, okay? Ask and receive kind of thing, you know? And next thing you know, it occurs to you and you go, oh yeah. And it's a very relaxed, wonderful kind of experience when you get that. Now, let's go to the other principle of consciousness. Consciousness is the ability to experience something as being real, and it's also a level of understanding. Okay, so if a person has a high level of understanding, it's different than a low level of understanding. If you have a low level of understanding about thought, you may not even realize that thought is involved. You just think it's all external reality. It's really that's going on. But if you realize that thought is an internal game, then you're more along the lines of something called internal. It's an internal frame of reference. There's external locus of control, internal locus of control. Internal locus of control, I realize that I have the power to decide something. I can do that. I realize that thoughts are my thoughts, or that it's thought. And external locus of control, you don't even notice that, or it's like I have no control over thought, or it's not even about thought. It's about, you know, it's not that I think that he's bothering me, he bothers me. Okay, it's external. Now, because of consciousness, we can experience thought as real, even though it isn't real. Now, it takes something to get to this kind of understanding, but if you get to this understanding, this higher level of thought recognition, then you start to, it's very generative, I find, that we start to move toward a higher level of emotional freedom and so on. And I can give you an example. Years ago, I used to go through some depression. And I remember this was in the early 90s. And I started looking at these concepts. And I started realizing that sometimes our minds get very sticky, that I get in a lower mood. And when you're in a lower mood, you tend to get hoodwinked by your thoughts more. And so one day, I woke up and I'm getting out of bed and I'm feeling down. And this happened, this was very quickly the way this happened. I'm walking on the way to the bathroom. And I realize that I'm caught up in all this stuff that happened a long time ago that's bothering me. And I'm feeling down. So I'm this thought, this memory, and thoughts are memories are thoughts, right? And it hit me. I thought, I must be in a low mood. And I thought, all these things that I'm being bothered about right now, they didn't bother me yesterday. And nothing has really changed because these are things from a long time ago. So it had to be that I was in a lower mood. And all of a sudden I could see that it was thought, and that thought wasn't real. It was a mirage, an illusion. So I would notice a thought. I would go, oh, there's a thought. And then it would just sort of dissipate. And then there was another one. And I thought, oh, there's another one. And it dissipated. And as I was in a role with that, I wasn't even trying. I was just observing. I go, oh, that's another thought. Isn't that interesting? And next thing I know, at some point I was driving to work. And I realized I felt really good. And I wondered, when did I start feeling really good? What accounted for that? And it wasn't any work. It was just a higher level of understanding. So anyway, that illustrates something of these principles. And the Michelangelo principle, I think, goes along with that too, because you're utilizing thought in a very healthy kind of way of looking at the health within the person. And as you do that, that gets you more into receiver mode too. You get the drift, get into receiver mode. And so those inspirations occur, which can be very beneficial to you and your client. Now, I just want to bring aside, there's an idea of, there's two ways of doing, I could say treatment, techniques, whatever. There's bottom up and top down. When you're going top down, you're going from maybe thought to the effects of thought on the way you feel. And when you go bottom up, you're going into the body and how, and so it addresses specifically the body. Tapping techniques like EFT, TFT, the midline technique, combine both of those, because you're targeting something that somebody feels. And then, so let's say it's depression, and they're feeling depressed. You have them notice that feeling, give it a rating, and then while they're tapping, which is utilizing more the body, they're saying something like maybe, even though I'm depressed, I accept myself. And then while they're tapping, they may be using what we call a reminder phrase. And they would be saying, this depression, this feeling of depression, this emptiness in the pit of my stomach, this feeling of hopelessness, or whatever the words are. So you're bringing up the thought, and at the same time, you're doing tapping. So it's both a bottom up, top down approach at the same time. And I think that's pretty effective when you do it that way. Bringing it all in together. So I just want to illustrate, in case if you don't know these things, these are some of the points for tapping. So to do this, for example, let's say you were feeling anxious about your client, you're feeling distressed. You can use a technique to help you move toward more of the Michelangelo principle. It can support you getting there. Ultimately, you don't even want to have to do that. You want to just be able to see that. But we tend to fall into a pattern of getting caught up in the external world and what's going on there. So it can be very useful to do something like this. So let's say we'll stay with the Michel-Angelo principle and that kind of distress. If you're feeling distressed about the client, you could go like this. And any of you listening right now, you could try this. You tap the side of your hand, first of all, and you say, even though I'm really upset about my client, I accept myself. Even though I feel that nothing's going to work out here, I accept myself. Even though I'm really feeling distressed, I accept myself. Whatever words. So the formula is, even though I have this problem, whatever the problem is, I accept myself. You can also add a third phrase, which moves in the direction of the positive. So you go, even though I have this problem, I accept myself, and I choose to feel better, or I'm open to a miracle, or I choose to let it go, something like that. Then what you do is you tap. So you begin by tapping the eyebrow, and you go, this problem or this feeling of distress or whatever you're targeting. Then the side of your eye, you could say again, this distress, under your eye, under your nose. Each time you could be reminding yourself of the issue that you're targeting, under your collarbones, under your arm. And I don't have this one listed here, but another option is to go to your inner wrist, which deals with the meridians that come off all the different fingers. So you just tap here and you say it again, this distress, and then you go to the top of your head. Okay. And you say it again. Okay. Now I often add another element, which isn't listed here. I have the person tap at the center of their chest, and while tapping at the center of your chest, you do a breathing exercise. Maybe you breathe 4-8 breathing. So you breathe in through your nose for 4, out through your mouth for 8. Then you stop, and a good next choice is to look around. You kind of look around, look at the birdie flying through the air. You know, you look at the computer screen. You look at your hands. I don't know. You look at something, and you sing a song. I don't know. You go, we will rock you. I don't know. So you kind of shift that, and then you stop and you think again. You bring it to mind again. You notice how you feel. By the way, I left something out. At the beginning, you could give it a rating, or 0 to 10, 10 being the worst, 0 being nothing. Or you just notice how it feels in your body and you see, is there a change? Does it feel somewhat better? So let's say it was an 8, and now you find it's a 5. Okay, so then you repeat it again. You do it again. You do it several times. Don't expect it to be a miracle the first time it all cleans it out. It could be several rounds before you really feel centered. And then you want to look at that whole thing. You go, yeah, I really got caught up in that thought. Isn't that interesting? You just kind of reflect for a moment, and then you go about your business. Anyway, with this, I think you're all very happy people. This will make you extremely happy. It'll make your clients happy. It will make the world happy, and everything will be utopia from now on. Now, that's not true, but it's a nice thought anyway. Anyway, so I love you all. Use this in good health. If you want to know any more about it, send me an email. Send Christiana an email. We'll go from there. Okay. Love you all. Mwah. We're done.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fred.
How long did that go on? How long did that go on?
I didn't have a look at the time. So are you still ready for some questions?
Oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, because many people have seen you at your workshops or have been at one of your trainings, but some people who might watch this wouldn't know anything about meridians, meridian points, tapping, muscle testing. If you could just elaborate on this a little bit, that would be nice.
Okay, say something more about meridians. Okay, are we still recording?
Yes, the recording goes on, and the idea would be to explain a bit about acupoints, so meridian points, tapping, muscle testing, so how this works. Thank you.
Okay. So, and you know, stop me at times if you need more clarification. But in acupuncture, or we could call it meridian therapies, because it isn't just acupuncture. It isn't acupuncture. You're using needles. There's acupressure where you're using pressure. They use, you know, and tapping is one of the elements. There are many points throughout the body that are have a lower level of resistance, and there's been research that's shown that these exist. A good number of them exist. And if you're doing acupuncture, they put needles if these what are called acupoints. Now I forget how many of them there are. There might be 700 or something, but there's only certain ones that are really relevant for treating different conditions. And the idea is it regulates the flow of energy through the body, through the system, and into the brain. Some people say acupuncture is always about the central nervous system. So it sends electrical impulses or subtle energy. The subtle energy is called chi, through these meridians into the brain and throughout the body. And the idea is that if we're using tapping, we're using partly the same concept, although this isn't precisely the same way acupuncturists would do things. But we believe that whenever a person has a let's say a psychological problem, but it isn't just psychological, physical, emotional problems, physical pain, that there's a disruption in the flow of the energy. There's something blocked, there's something not moving right. And by doing the tapping, we're getting the energy to start flowing. Okay. We're doing something else too. The idea is that there's a subtle marker that it's like subtle information. In physics, they call this active information. And it's related to these different locations where I have you tap, okay? So that what it does is it collapses those markers and then allows the energy to flow, but also it creates chemical changes, you know, neuropsychological changes, you know, genetic changes. There's been research that's shown that tapping on acupoints has actually altered the way genes are manifested. It changes the cortisol levels, the stress levels, and so on. It'll also do this when it comes to a trauma. One of the things that happens in a trauma is the amygdala, which is a more primitive area of the brain that's always scouting the environment for dangers. It settles it down. It quells the amygdala, and then the person gets over the trauma because it can be processed better. So, but anyway, the point is that we found certain points that tend to be good points to tap. So the acupoints here at the eyebrow, that's on the bladder meridian. At the side of the eye, it's on the gallbladder meridian. Under the eyes, on the stomach meridian, and so on. It's not that this is just about the bladder. This is about a meridian system. And so we're tapping to release the block. And as a result, it changes your emotional reaction. Did that explain that well enough, Christiana? Yeah, okay. So now what else did we need there? What is the other question?
So maybe we can just stop the screen sharing so that we can see you better.
Oh yeah, let me see
Yeah,
if I
so just stop that.
let's see where I do that.
Um,
So what else would you like me to do?
yeah, the other question that occurred to me was, I found that really, really impressive when you talked about the clock synchronizing and the therapist being in a state of health. I think this is also something that we share with the view of Milton Erickson in his hypnotherapy. Yeah.
Oh,
But what I was thinking about was of some of my colleagues who are working with severe trauma patients, and I was wondering how can we stay in a state of health when on the other hand we need empathy for for people who are, for example, at the moment we have the war in Ukraine and we have many refugees who have really lived through hell, and then you listen to their stories and of course you're in empathy, and how not to get caught up in that. What would be your suggestion?
And it's very common to get caught up in it because you identify with what the person's going through. And I think of it as there's a difference between, I think words like sympathy, empathy, and compassion, there's a difference, okay? Compassion, I prefer to come from compassion. And compassion is you recognize that this is a human predicament that this person's going through, human, and you feel, how can I put it? You feel, I guess compassion is kind of like a love for them, okay? And you know they're going through a lot, and but you don't go into sympathy, because when you're into sympathy, it's like you're identifying with it as though it's happening to you. I'm relating it to how did this happen to my children or whatever, okay? And then I feel terrible, and that lowers my spirit, okay? And it's not unusual for that to happen, but when you catch that happening, you realize that I just got caught up in that, and I'm not being there for them at this point. I'm kind of caught up in my own thing, and so you go back and you listen, and you and you look at their heart, their soul, and you listen, but you listen without getting really caught up in distress. I mean, you don't want to be what is it? Looking for the right word. You don't want to be not caring. That wouldn't be good for you as a therapist either, and I don't think that would be good for the client. You care, but it isn't sympathy. It isn't like you're not stepping into their shoes and feeling that same way. I'm still coming from this compassion, this love and compassion, and so they say something like, this terrible thing. You say, oh, I feel bad for you. You maybe say, or it's and you listen, and you keep your eye on the soul, and you as much as you can stay in this healthy state, because that's going to help them. If you really care, then that's the state to be in. That will help them come out, okay? But then you have to have something you can deliver. And what I find is, people that have long-term trauma, that it goes way back, the relationship is going to be the most important thing at first, okay? You got to really have that connection with them first. If it's a single incident trauma, if it's, they just had some bad thing happen and they're caught up in that, but generally they're in fairly good health, you still want to have a connection. There's still rapport is always, say, job number one. but then you can fairly quickly go into a technique. You can fairly quickly do tapping, or, you know, some people use EMDR or somatic experiencing. There's many different techniques, but you can more efficiently treat whenever that's a situation. But always, you know, the first thing is to be in this state of compassion. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
A last question. You were talking a lot about receiver mode, about this clear your mind and then something will occur to you. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, because, you know, at the Congress we have therapists with very different experiences. So we have therapists who have more than 20 years of experience and others who are just starting. And do you think this is open to everyone, or is this something that is linked also to a kind of experience?
Well, both, I guess. First of all, I'm coming from the idea that, first of all, everybody has within them wisdom, that it's already there, and we can get in the way of accessing it. Okay, you know, you've heard the expression "out of the mouths of babes." You know that expression? Have you ever heard that? Out of the mouths of babes. Maybe it's just an English term. Okay, yeah. But it's it means basically sometimes you get this wisdom coming out of a child, and you go, "Wow, where did that come from?" You know, like I remember a little story about, there was this truck, a big semi truck, and it was going this underpass, and it got stuck because it was too high. And all these people are looking, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and they're thinking, well, maybe what they can do is they're going to have to, you know, take the wheels off the truck, or they're just trying to figure out how to do this. And there's this little kid looking, and he says to his dad, "Dad, why don't they just lower the air in the tires?" You know, people weren't thinking of that. You know, just lower the air in the tires, and now it comes down. You know, and so that's kind of like a wisdom. Now, here's the thing about what I'm saying. Whenever you know the experience of you can't, like I was doing something the other day. There was a song that I had heard on the radio, and I thought, oh, that's a pretty cool song, and I wanted to remember it, and then I forgot about it because and I thought, what was the name of that song? And I went down the alphabet trying to figure it out, and I was feeling, a certain level of stress about you're trying to recall this thing, and you can't. So I figured, no, I just got to put that out of my mind. Just got to put it out of my mind. And then, and that was yesterday. And then this morning, the song starts going through my head. Okay, so I can hear, and it was da 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 da. And there it was again. Okay, what is the words to that song? What's the title of that? And then it hit me, going on the Ritz. And then I looked it up in the internet, and I was able to find the song. We've all had that experience. Like I can't remember a name or whatever, and we're trying to process it, and then we just let it go, and somehow it comes, and that's receiver mode. Okay, so if you apply the same thing in therapy, you're across from the client, and if you're too much into processing mode, I got to figure out what to do here. What's the diagnosis, or maybe I should try this or that, and you find you're not really listening very well. So you clear your mind, you listen, you just listen and ask questions and listen, and you wait. And what will happen is something will occur to you that really suits the situation. And I don't know I mean, yeah, experience matters. But geez, I remember things that I did when I was in my early 20s where I had very little experience. And I wasn't a psychologist yet. And I was working with kids that were juvenile delinquents in an institution for juvenile delinquency. And some kids, it just hit the mark, and I did things that helped them. Okay. And there's no reason I should have been able to do that. You know, I didn't have a PhD. I didn't have years of experience, but somehow, sometimes somebody, you know, you're just in the flow, you know. And now, I know there's this too. I think sometimes when people get caught up in a lot of learning, what I've seen with doctors, physicians, psychologists, that earlier on, they maybe go too much by the book. And later on, you start to understand that that's not the way to do things, you know, that you got to really individualize it, and you got to do it in a real way. I remember a physician saying to me one time, he would work with people that had seizure disorders. And he said, you know, Fred, he says, you know, what I do is, he says, so I have this person who they have epilepsy. And so we do a blood test and we find out that they're not at a clinical level of the medication. So they don't have enough, whatever medication they're prescribing to control the Dilantin or whatever. He says, but they're not having seizures. Okay, so I find they're not having seizures. He says, why would I elevate the medication into maybe a toxic level when they're doing fine? Because now the book says I should elevate it into a certain range, but they're not having seizures. He says, I won't do that. Now, that's an experienced physician, you know. And somebody earlier on would go, no, you got to go by the book. This is the protocol. This is how it's supposed to be. And, you know, I understand some people might have to do that because they would be afraid they'd get sued if they didn't do it or whatever, you know. But I think with experience comes a different kind of thing too. So there's value to experience, but at the same time, there's this kind of wisdom. I think that wisdom of what the doctor had to say about the Dilantin, that could occur to a younger person too. You know, he could just say, no, I can't see having to do that, you know.
Could we say that this is something like intuition?
Yeah.
So that you build on your experience, on the methods, on research, of course, but that you also give a place to intuition?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But how you get to it is basically by listening, clearing your mind, in a sense, I know it's a funny phrase, clear your mind. You don't make thoughts totally gone, but you just don't attach. You're waiting for the inspiration to occur, the intuition to occur. And when it occurs, you go, could that be? You know, it just sort of comes out of the blue. And then you check it out with your client. There's, in my book, The Tapping Toolbox, I go into what I call the Relita model. And it is about how to do that, how to get in touch with that. Now, the thing is, you know, I think sometimes tapping can work in the service of that too. It's like, for me to be able to get to a higher level of understanding about thought and so on, sometimes what I got to do is tap out the thoughts so that the stress level, because when you're more in stress, you don't have access to that very well. You have access to that better when you're feeling secure. I was just talking to a client who was she went into well, she's not a client of mine, she's a colleague I know. She had to go into a psychiatric unit. And boy, the way the people treated her there, I don't know what they were thinking. You know, here she went in, she's very distressed. And the therapist, they had a so-called therapist working with her. He was very confrontive and challenging, and made her even feel more insecure. And where's the common sense in that? You know, I understand that some people think that's what you're supposed to do, but it doesn't make sense. And so you got to create the right kind of environment for listening and feeling of security. When people are feeling insecure, they don't learn very well, and they don't benefit very well from therapy. I mean, you don't want to lie to them. It isn't that. But there's ways to do things that are more supportive. You know, you're very good at that. I mean, I know you. You elevate people very well. You know, so it's and that, I guess that comes with either that's the way you are, or it comes with experience. You got to believe that if the person's feeling distressed, they're not going to have access to their wisdom as well. That the wisdom is in there, not only for them, but for you too. Okay. Does that answer that?
Yes. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for your time, Fred Gallo. We had the chance to have you for 1 hour instead of just a little presentation. So I'm really happy that we could do this, and thank you very much.
It was good seeing you, good talking to your people. Just send this around. Hopefully it helps. It proves a benefit to people.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.